The 169th edition of the Roy's Boys podcast starts right now.
Carolina basketball family is the strongest there's ever been. There ever will be.
Nate Humphrey hands King Rice the ball. Pushes into Hubert Davis. 8 seconds. Davis trying to get free. Over to Fox. Fox, baseline. Up for the shot. Good. Off the glass. Oklahoma calls timeout. But the game is over. The game is over. Carolina has upset number 1 Oklahoma. Been ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered by Minnie.
With 20 seconds left to play, goes back to Michael Jordan. Jumper from out on the left. Good! 63, 62, 13, 12, 11. Georgetown with one timeout. Brent Brown looking. Throw away to Worthy. Worthy fired. The Tar Heels are going to win the national championship. Carolina with foul. He takes the timeout. Technical foul. Technical foul.
Brown gets it into Williams. Here comes Williams front court. Williams on the drive. Gets it back out the head. Long outside shot. Short rebound. It's over. And how about the Tar Heels? They are the national champions.
The Tar Heels are the national dadgum champions.
And that's what it takes when you big time games. You got to compete. You do it with your brain, and you got to do it with your heart too. And that's pretty doggone good.
From QCBroadcasting.com, this is the Roy's Boys podcast with your host, Josh Marlowe. Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Roy's Boys podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Today I am joined by GoHeels writer and member of the Tar Heel Sports Network, Adam Lucas. Adam, how's it going today, man?
Good, how about you?
Nah, not too bad. So let's go ahead and dive right into this thing. I got a lot to talk to you about in terms of Carolina on the basketball court this season. Of course, the last time we saw the Tar Heels, they lost to Florida State, but they competed at a really high level. They sit overall 8-5, 3-3 in the ACC. What is your current analysis of the team so far?
Well, I think it's difficult to know for sure because although we're in mid-January, we're not really in mid-January in terms of this team's development. I think if they had played the normal amount of games they would typically play in November and December, I think we'd feel a lot differently about them, and they'd probably look a little different too. So I think we're seeing improvement, but it's the type of improvement you might typically see in maybe late December, early January. And so I think that's frustrating to some folks because it feels like things are a little behind schedule.
In that game, Anthony Harris made his return. What does the return of Anthony Harris mean for Carolina moving forward?
It's going to be interesting to see. I think Coach Williams has been pretty clear that he plans to be very cautious with Anthony. He doesn't want to overdo it. And, of course, now he's coming off 2 torn ACLs, so Coach Williams just wants to err on the side of caution. So I don't think he's ready to play 30 minutes yet, if that was even going to be in the cards for him. But I think he'll play in spurts as he did against Florida State, and he was effective. And then they'll see how he does in practice. Carolina practiced on Monday, and he did some stuff, but not everything. And so I think they'll probably try to slowly build him back up and get him back ready for game shape on Wednesday night.
You mentioned that Roy Williams is going to be cautious with him, especially him coming off back-to-back torn ACLs. With that in mind, is it reasonable to expect improved play from Caleb Love and R.J. Davis in the meantime?
I think those two things are independent of each other. I think Caleb Love is shooting the ball much better. Well, I don't know about much better. He's shooting the ball better than he was in the first month or so of the season, and I think that's encouraging. But I think you need better playmaking from him because one of Carolina's shortcomings at the present time really is a point guard who facilitates the offense. R.J. Davis is the reigning ACC Freshman of the Week. I think he's looked better the last couple games, and it looks like he might be getting a little more comfortable. So I think there's progress there.
Garrison Brooks hasn't had the season we expected him to have after being named the ACC Preseason Player of the Year. What do you think has led to the struggles for the senior big man?
Well, I think, first of all, it was always unfair for anyone to expect him to be the ACC Player of the Year. Carolina would have had to been as bad as they were last year in order for him to get the amount of touches that he got last year. And I don't think that was ever going to be the case. That being said, I think here over the last month or so, he's just lost a little confidence. He just needed to see the ball go in the basket. You started to see that happen a little bit more, but I think you just need him to be more active in general. You need more rebounding, and the scoring will come. And I think a lot of Carolina's younger players are looking to Garrison to see how to handle struggles when they go through it, and so I think his leadership's important as well.
Despite the struggles of the aforementioned Garrison Brooks, Armando Bacot's been the most consistent big man for Carolina, and Day'Ron Sharper has really lived up to the hype coming in as a freshman. Can you speak on the play of both of those guys?
Well, I think it's very much indicative of what you might see from a sophomore and from a freshman. Because, as you said, Armando's been the most consistent, which was a thing he struggled with last year as a freshman when he was very up and down. I think he's been pretty dependable this year. You pretty much know what you're going to get from him. I think Day'Ron has experienced some of that inconsistency here in the last couple of games, which is what's going to happen when you're a freshman who's playing ACC-level basketball. Teams are going to scout you. Teams are going to know what you like to do, and you're going to have to figure out how to do something different because they're going to take that away from you. But the one thing Day'Ron can always do is rebound, and that's something that is always going to enable you to play for Roy Williams because he loves rebounders. So I think even when the shots aren't falling, as they haven't been as consistently for Sharp here lately, he's still got to go to the boards, both offensive and defensive.
Off the top of your head, what big man does Day'Ron Sharp remind you of as a freshman?
That's a good question. He's so physical, and his teammates all describe him sort of as a bully, which I think is a complimentary term.
Right.
When they're describing him, I'm trying to think of someone that physical and as a freshman. I don't know that one necessarily comes to mind right off the bat. Just because it's rare to get a player like that. Even some of the former Carolina coaches who came through this summer and this fall, one of the first things they would comment on when they watched the team either play pickup or practice or whatever was that you just don't see freshmen who look like Day'Ron Sharp. And so I think that's something obviously that is not inconsistent. He always is going to have that physicality, which is going to help him over the balance of the season.
You mentioned that Carolina needs more playmaking from Caleb Love, and I think everyone can agree with that. I asked Jones Angel this last week. Are we more tougher on his development because of how good Kobe White and Cole Anthony were as freshmen for Carolina?
I think Carolina fans in general just have a high bar for point guards. I think they've always had, going back to the Phil Ford era, a special bond with their point guards, and they're used to point guards who understand the game, who know how to run it the way the head coach wants them to, whether it's Dean Smith or Roy Williams, and make their teammates better. And I think that's just something you don't necessarily stumble upon in 2 or 3 months of college basketball. I think a junior Caleb Love would do every single one of those things to a level that would thrill Carolina fans. But right now we're dealing with a 2-month in of COVID Caleb Love, and that's just a very different way to learn the game and to understand how to facilitate the game for your teammates. Kobe White was a comet. The only people who realized he was going to be one and done were his teammates and his coaches after about a month that he had been on campus. So I think he's a special case. Cole Anthony was always going to be one and done, and he was a different kind of player, but obviously there's no arguing that to this point in their respective Carolina careers, he was more successful than Caleb Love was at that spot.
In the wins over Notre Dame and Miami, Carolina won in large part because of the play of the veterans Leaky Black and Andrew Platek, guys who have been criticized by myself and the fan base in general, as you well know. What has impressed you the most about those two guys this season?
Well, I think there have been games where Leaky Black has looked like the player that you always kind of suspected he could be, that guy who's a tough matchup offensively because he can drive a normal-sized guard to the rim and can score a little closer to the basket, who doesn't settle for jump shots, and then defensively is just a terror and someone you don't want guarding you. But there have also been games where he has not been good defensively, and there have been games where he's been too willing to settle for jump shots offensively. So I think you need more of the first type of play from him on a consistent basis. Andrew Platek, I feel like, has has gotten more into a groove of a role as a guy who does what the team needs him to do and can occasionally knock down a shot every once in a while. He shot it better this year than he did last year. He is Roy Williams' type of defender in that he is almost always in the right place. We were talking to Andrew Platek recently, and he said he feels like he's probably not going to make a mistake that loses the game for you, and I think that's probably right. He's not going to jump over you and dunk it, but he's not going to make some sort of mental error or positioning error that causes a big breakdown. So I think you need those guys, but I think you probably don't need those guys playing 38 minutes, which is what he had to do sometimes last year.
Right.
So I think he's in a better place as a senior.
My podcast is named after Roy Williams, so that kind of tells you what I think of our head coach. After the loss to Georgia Tech, I wanted more from him in terms of hands-on coaching. What is the assessment of the job he has done this season, and do you think he's getting the most out of his team and the talent he has on this roster?
What do you mean by hands-on coaching?
Like maybe calling a little bit more timeouts, maybe calling more set plays, because we know he's more of a guy that wants to let his guys figure it out and play through it. I feel like with this team, he needs to be a little bit more kind of holding their hands and walking them through the process.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly recognize that is a common criticism, and I think that's, if you were to adjust that, that's a way to win a game in December or January. I think he would tell you he's trying to get them ready to play in March.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's not going to be frustrating between now and then. I think no one's ever going to fully understand the challenges of coaching any team, not just this Carolina team, during all the things that have gone on for the last few months. I mean, you've got guys who came to college to go to college, and they're living in a hotel, never seeing anyone other than their teammates, being tested for COVID 3 or 4 times a week, not knowing if they're going to play the game that's scheduled to be played 24 hours from now. That's just no one's ever done that before.
Right.
And I think Tim and I have talked about pretty consistently, even since the beginning of football season, the teams that are going to end up thriving in this season are the ones that handle that stuff the best. It won't necessarily be the most talented teams. It'll be the teams that have the culture to get through all the weirdness and not get mad at each other or frustrated with not being able to ever go out and see anybody and things like that. And I think that's still to be determined. I think you're starting to see some teams, especially on the women's side, break down. And I won't be surprised if we see the same stuff on the men's side. I don't think you're going to see that with Carolina, and I think that's because of Roy Williams and just the program that's in place.
This is a big week for Carolina. They got 2 winnable home games in the Smith Center against Wake Forest and NC State on Saturday. What would going 2-0 this week do for this team moving forward?
I think Carolina's got to go 2-0 this week if they play 2 games. I think you feel like you should beat Wake Forest at home. I think the Deacons are still a little bit of an unknown just because they've played so few games and you're not as familiar with their coach, Steve Forbes. But I think on paper that's a game Carolina should win. And then I think the big variable becomes the NC State game on Saturday. Does that game get played? State's got virus issues. And I can't imagine the Pac would be real thrilled with coming off a 10-day break and then playing Carolina, although we just saw Florida State come off a long break and play great. But on State's previous break, they were very hesitant to play. There was some behind-the-scenes stuff there that they were hesitant to jump right back into playing big games. So I don't know if they're going to be willing to do that. If that game doesn't get played, the ACC's got to find a way for Carolina to play somebody this weekend because you're starting to drop so many games. The postseason isn't going to make sense anymore.
Right.
So really hopeful that one way or another, the Tar Heels get to take the court 2 times this week.
You're a part of the Carolina media in more ways than one. How has COVID-19 affected the way you do your job, both on game days and then non-game days?
Man, it's been a lot different. Game days, it's just even more so. I think with basketball than football, it's just so noticeable that the fans aren't there. In most cases, there have been fans at a couple places Carolina's gone, but by and large, nobody's there. It just feels different. It's not the same. It's not as fun. It's not as fun going to the Smith Center and not having all these students down there in the risers and a full house, 21,000 people every night. That's disappointing. You don't get to interact as much with the players. We've been lucky to be able to talk to a few of them on the podcast, which has been good, but you're used to seeing them day in, day out, practice and games and things like that. Just haven't been able to do that and get to know them as well. So that's been disappointing. But certainly on the grand scale of things that everyone is dealing with, that's far, far, far down the list. And if we can get in close to a normal season, I think that'll be a success. But that doesn't mean that over the summer, man, we're not really going to look forward to a much more normal year next year for what we normally expect from college basketball.
Right.